mess hall erupted in laughter. Private Jensen was on a roll, mimicking the old cook's shuffle, the way his weathered hands trembled as he ladled soup. The other young soldiers doubled over, barely keeping their trays steady. Forks clattered against plastic. Someone's milk carton hit the floor. Gramps probably peels potatoes slower than my grandma, Jensen snorted, loud enough to carry across 3 tables. The old man behind the serving line didn't look up, just kept moving, steady and silent, those calloused hands working the ladle like clockwork. Steam rose from the industrial pots, clouding the fluorescent lights above. His name tag, faded and slightly crooked, read simply, Harrison. Sergeant First Class Martinez sat 2 tables away, his fork frozen halfway to his mouth. He'd been at Fort Campbell for 11 months now, long enough to know the rhythms of this place, long enough to know which jokes were harmless and which ones crossed lines. This one felt wrong, but Sergeant First Class Martinez saw it. The way the old cook's jaw tightened, just once, just barely. A muscle working beneath weathered skin that had seen too much sun, too many years. Jensen was still going. I swear, last week I watched him take 10 minutes to open a can of beans. A can opener defeated him. More laughter. Even some of the older privates were grinning now, the ones who should have known better. Martinez watched Harrison's hands. They didn't shake. Not really. They moved with a precision that spoke of decades of repetition, of muscle memory that ran deeper than age. Scoop, pour, move. Scoop, pour, move. Never looking up, never engaging. You done? Harrison's voice was quiet, barely audible over the din. He was looking at Jensen's tray, full, untouched, waiting. Jensen smirked. Yeah, Pops. Thanks for the 5-star cuisine. You're welcome. Harrison's voice carried no emotion, no anger, no hurt. Just those 2 words, flat as Kansas prairie. The young soldier moved on, still chuckling, his buddies in tow. Martinez finished his meal in silence. He'd been in the Army for 18 years, deployed 4 times, earned his stripes in places that didn't make the news anymore. He'd learned to read people the way some men read maps, quickly, accurately, looking for the terrain beneath the surface. And everything about William Harrison said, soldier. The way he stood, even behind a serving line, weight distributed, ready. The way his eyes tracked movement without seeming to watch. The faded ink on his left forearm, barely visible beneath the sleeve he always wore long, even in the Kentucky summer heat. The way he said, you're welcome, like he meant it, like manners were a form of armor. Martinez had seen it before. Men who'd served, who'd come home, who'd found a place in the world that let them disappear into routine. The military was full of them. Civilian contractors who'd once worn the uniform, who knew the rules without being told, who showed up early and left late and never caused problems. But something about Harrison gnawed at him. That night, Martinez couldn't sleep. The barracks were quiet except for the usual sounds. Someone snoring 3 bunks down, the hum of the ancient air conditioning unit, the occasional creak of metal frame beds as bodies shifted in dreams. Martinez lay on his back, staring at the ceiling tiles, counting the water stains he'd memorized months ago. Those eyes, Harrison's eyes. Martinez had looked into a lot of eyes over his career. He'd seen fear, anger, exhaustion, determination. He'd seen the 1,000-yard stare that came from seeing too much. He'd seen the blank look of men who'd shut down completely, who'd learned to function without feeling. Harrison's eyes were different. They weren't empty. They were distant, like a man looking at something no one else could see, like a man who'd left part of himself somewhere and never quite figured out how to bring it home. At 02:37 hours, Martinez gave up on sleep. He pulled on sweats and walked to the company office, quiet as a ghost. The desk sergeant nodded at him. Thompson, good kid, didn't ask unnecessary questions. Can't sleep, Sergeant? Something I need to check. Martinez settled in front of one of the computers, the old desktop that took 30 seconds to boot up. The screen glowed blue in the darkness. He pulled up the base personnel files, civilian contractors, scrolled through the names alphabetically. There were hundreds of them: maintenance workers, administrative staff, food services, custodial. The machine that kept a military base running required an army of invisible people. Harrison, William T. Position, kitchen staff, food preparation and service. Start date: March 15, 1972. DOB, April 3, 1947. Status: active. Martinez stared at the dates. 1972. That was 51 years ago. Harrison had been working on this base for 51 years. He clicked on the file. The photo was recent, maybe a year old. Harrison in a plain white shirt, no smile, looking directly at the camera with those distant eyes. The image quality was poor, overexposed, but Martinez could see the lines in the man's face, the gray stubble, the scar tissue on his left cheek that might have been from a burn. There wasn't much else in the file. No disciplinary actions, no complaints, no commendations either. Just a work history that stretched back through decades, through presidencies and wars and changing technology. A single unbroken line of service that nobody noticed because nobody looked. Martinez leaned back. 51 years of peeling potatoes and ladling soup, showing up at 0500, leaving at 1400. Retirement age had come and gone. Most men would have taken their pension and Social Security and found a fishing boat somewhere. Why was Harrison still here? He opened a new tab, typed the name into Google, fingers hesitant on the keys. William Harrison, military. 3 million results. Too generic. He tried again. William T. Harrison, Army, 1970s. The results narrowed. A few genealogy sites. A mention in a reunion announcement for the 173rd Airborne Brigade. A barely legible scan of what looked like a yearbook page. Martinez kept scrolling. Then he stopped. The fourth result down was a link to the Congressional Medal of Honor Society website. The preview text read, Harrison, William T. Vietnam War. For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty. Martinez's hand froze on the mouse. He clicked. The page loaded slowly, images resolving pixel by pixel. At the top was a black and white photograph, a young man in army dress uniform, maybe 22 years old, looking uncomfortable in front of a formal backdrop. The resemblance was unmistakable. Same nose, same jawline, same eyes, though younger, less distant. Below the photo, text in a formal serif font, Harrison, William T. Rank, Sergeant, U.S. Army Company, B Company, 1st Battalion, 506th Infantry Regiment, 101st Airborne Division. Place and date, Thua Thien Province, Republic of Vietnam, November 12, 1968. Citation: for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty. Sergeant Harrison distinguished himself while serving as squad leader during a reconnaissance patrol deep in enemy-held territory. When his platoon came under intense fire from a numerically superior enemy force occupying well-concealed bunkers, Sergeant Harrison's commanding officer was killed instantly, and 12 men were pinned down in an exposed position with no cover. Disregarding his own safety, Sergeant Harrison left his position of relative security and, exposed to withering enemy machine gun fire, moved across 200 yards of open terrain to reach the wounded. Under continuous fire, he carried 4 critically wounded soldiers to safety, making 4 separate trips across the kill zone. Despite sustaining multiple gunshot wounds to his left arm and leg, Sergeant Harrison refused medical evacuation and returned to the field of fire a fifth time to recover the body of his fallen commanding officer. When enemy forces began to overrun the position, Sergeant Harrison personally held the line for 17 minutes, allowing the remainder of his platoon to withdraw to defensible terrain. His actions directly saved the lives of 12 soldiers and prevented the complete destruction of his unit. Only after confirming all wounded had been evacuated did Sergeant Harrison allow himself to be carried from the battlefield. His extraordinary heroism and selflessness in the face of almost certain death were in keeping with the highest traditions of military service and reflect great credit upon himself, the 101st Airborne Division, and the United States Army. Martinez read it twice. Then he looked at the start date on the base personnel file again. March 15th, 1972. He did the math. Harrison would have come home from Vietnam in late 1968 or early 1969, recovered from his wounds, been medically discharged probably, and then, 3 years later, he'd shown up at Fort Campbell and asked for a job in the kitchen. He'd been here ever since. 51 years ago, William T. Harrison had charged across 200 yards of open ground, under machine gun fire, wounded, saving lives while the world burned around him. The President of the United States had placed the Medal of Honor around his neck, and this morning, Private Jensen had made fun of the way he walked. Martinez sat in the dark office for a long time, the computer screen the only light. Thompson had gone on rounds. The building was silent except for the hum of fluorescent bulbs in the hallway. He pulled up another window, searched for more, found a few newspaper articles from 1969. Local hero returns home. Kentucky soldier awarded nation's highest honor. The articles were brief, filled with the patriotic language of the era. There was a photo from the medal ceremony, Harrison in dress blues, young and thin, President Johnson pinning the ribbon around his neck. Harrison wasn't smiling, just standing there, at attention, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else. There was one interview, published in the Louisville Courier-Journal in 1970. The reporter had tracked Harrison down at his parents' farm outside Lexington. "I don't feel like a hero," Harrison said when asked about his Medal of Honor. The real heroes didn't come home. When pressed about his plans for the future, Harrison was quiet for a long moment. "I'm looking for something simple," he finally said. "Something that doesn't require thinking too much." That was it. The last public mention Martinez could find. After that, William T. Harrison had disappeared into the machinery of everyday life, emerging only as a name on a kitchen roster, a man who showed up to work and did his job and never asked for anything. Martinez closed the browser windows, shut down the computer, walked back to the barracks through the pre-dawn darkness, his mind racing. The Medal of Honor wasn't just a decoration, it was a story. It was legend made flesh. There were only 63 living recipients in the entire country. They were invited to presidential inaugurations. They flew on military aircraft free for life. They received a monthly pension. Their children got free education at military academies. And William T. Harrison was in the kitchen, ladling soup. Morning formation at 0630 came too quickly. Martinez stood with his platoon in the gray light, watching the company assemble in neat rows. The air was already humid, promising another scorcher. Somewhere in the distance, artillery practice rumbled like thunder. Captain Morrison ran through the daily briefing, training schedules, maintenance requirements, a reminder about proper uniform standards, the usual rhythm. Martinez barely heard it. He was watching the mess hall entrance, 2 buildings over. At 6:45, a figure emerged from the side door. Harrison, wearing his white kitchen uniform, carrying a trash bag toward the dumpsters, moving slowly, but not shuffling, walking with purpose. The young man's imitation from yesterday had been cruel, Martinez realized now. Harrison didn't shuffle because he was weak or slow. He walked the way a man walks when every step is measured, when the body has learned to compensate for old injuries that never quite healed. 200 yards, machine gun fire, multiple gunshot wounds. Of course, he walked carefully. Formation dismissed. The platoon scattered toward their duty stations. Martinez lingered, letting the crowd thin. Then he walked toward the mess hall. Breakfast service was in full swing. The line stretched halfway across the cafeteria, soldiers in PT gear, still sweating from morning runs, others in ACUS preparing for work details. The air smelled like coffee and bacon and industrial cleaning solution. Harrison was back at his station, working the serving line. Same position as yesterday, same steady movements. A young private held out his tray, and Harrison loaded it with scrambled eggs, precise portions, no wasted motion. "Thank you," the private said. "You're welcome." Martinez joined the line, heart beating harder than it should. What was he going to say? "Hey, I Googled you last night and found out you're a living legend. Sorry about the kids making fun of you. Why didn't you tell anyone?" He moved through the line, took a tray, approached the serving station. Harrison looked up. Those distant eyes met his for a fraction of a second, and Martinez felt something pass between them. Recognition, maybe, or just the acknowledgement of one soldier seeing another. "Morning," Harrison said. "Morning." Martinez held out his tray. The ladle moved. Eggs appeared, then sausage, then hash browns. Martinez opened his mouth to say something. He still didn't know what, but Jensen's voice cut across the cafeteria. "Yo, Sergeant Martinez! Over here!" The moment broke. Harrison was already turning to the next soldier in line. Martinez took his tray and walked to an empty table, ignoring Jensen's wave. He ate slowly, watching, observing. Harrison worked for another 20 minutes until the breakfast rush ended and the line dwindled to nothing. Then he wiped down his station, removed his apron, and disappeared into the back kitchen area. Martinez pushed his tray aside. He'd made a decision sometime between midnight and dawn, though he couldn't have said exactly when. He was going to talk to Harrison, really talk to him, not as a sergeant to a civilian contractor, but as one soldier to another. He needed to understand why. Why the silence? Why the anonymity? Why a man who'd earned the nation's highest honor was content to be invisible? But not today, not here, in front of everyone. He needed the right moment, the right approach. Martinez stood, bussed his tray, and walked toward the kitchen entrance marked "Authorized Personnel Only." The door was propped open for ventilation. Inside, he could see industrial sinks, stainless steel shelves, boxes of supplies stacked to the ceiling. Harrison was at the sink, scrubbing a pot, his back to the door. Martinez was about to step inside when he heard voices, other kitchen staff arriving for prep work. The moment passed. He turned away, but as he walked back across the cafeteria, he made a silent promise. Private Jensen was going to learn who he'd been laughing at. They all were. And Martinez was going to make sure William T. Harrison got the respect he'd earned 55 years ago, even if the old soldier didn't want it. Martinez waited 3 days. Not because he didn't want to talk to Harrison, because he needed to do this right. A man doesn't carry silence for 51 years without reason. You don't just walk up and strip that away because you found something on the internet. So Martinez watched and learned. Harrison arrived at 04:45 every morning, always through the side entrance, carrying a worn canvas bag that probably held his lunch. He changed into his kitchen whites in the locker room, was at his station by 0500 sharp. He worked breakfast service until 9 a.m., then moved to prep work, vegetables mostly, the repetitive tasks that required steady hands and patience. He took his lunch break at 11:30, always alone, always in the same spot at the corner table facing the windows. He ate food he'd brought from home, sandwiches wrapped in wax paper, an apple, a thermos of what looked like black coffee. He never bought food from the line he served. He left at 1400 after the lunch service was cleaned up and prep for dinner was complete. Out the same side door he'd entered. Martinez followed him once, carefully, and watched him climb into a 1987 Ford pickup truck, primer gray and rust red, and drive off base toward town. On the third night, Martinez drove into Clarksville, found Harrison's address in the personnel file, a small apartment complex off Peacher's Mill Road, the kind built in the 70s and never updated. Unit 2B. The truck was in the parking lot, backed into a space with military precision. Martinez sat in his car for 20 minutes, engine off, trying to figure out what he was doing. Finally, he admitted the truth. He was stalling, because once he knocked on that door, there was no going back. He drove home without knocking. The next morning, he tried a different approach. The kitchen was quiet at 11:45. Lunch rush hadn't started yet. Harrison was at the industrial sink, hands deep in soapy water, washing the breakfast pans that were too large for the machine. His sleeves were rolled up to the elbows, the first time Martinez had seen his forearms fully exposed. The scars were worse than he'd imagined. Not just the puckered bullet wounds he'd expected, but burn scars too. Mottled tissue that spoke of fire or napalm or something equally terrible. The tattoo he'd glimpsed before was partially obscured by scar tissue, but Martinez could make out enough, airborne in faded Gothic script, and below it, numbers that might have been dates. Martinez stood in the doorway, suddenly uncertain. This was a man's private pain, written on skin for anyone to see, but ignored by everyone. The kitchen staff walked past Harrison every day and never looked, never saw, never asked. "Help you, Sergeant?" Harrison's voice came without turning around. He'd known Martinez was there. Of course he had. "Was hoping to talk to you, Mr. Harrison, if you have a minute." "I'm on the clock. Won't take long." Harrison rinsed the pan, set it in the drying rack with a metallic clang, dried his hands on a towel, rolled down his sleeves with practiced efficiency. Then he turned around, those distant eyes settling on Martinez with something that might have been resignation. "All right." They walked outside, into the brutal midday heat. The loading dock behind the mess hall was empty except for stacked pallets and the smell of garbage from the dumpsters. Not private exactly, but away from ears. Harrison leaned against the concrete wall, arms crossed, waiting. Not defensive, just contained, like a man who'd learned to occupy as little space as possible. Martinez had rehearsed this conversation a dozen times. Now all his prepared words felt wrong. "I know who you are," he said finally. Something flickered across Harrison's face. Not surprise, something older. Sadness maybe, or exhaustion. "A lot of people know who I am. I serve them eggs every morning." "That's not what I mean." Harrison was quiet for a long moment. A truck rumbled past on the main road beyond the base fence. Somewhere in the distance, a drill sergeant was counting cadence. "You been Googling me, Sergeant Martinez?" "Yes, sir." "Don't call me sir. I work for a living." The old joke, delivered without humor, force of habit. sir." Martinez caught himself, stopped, started over. "Mr. Harrison, William, or just Harrison, your choice." William. It felt too informal, too familiar for what Martinez wanted to say. I found the citation. November 12th, 1968, Thua Tien Province. Harrison's jaw tightened. That same muscle Martinez had seen in the cafeteria 3 days ago, when Jensen was doing his impression. That was a long time ago. Not that long, not for something like that. Long enough that it doesn't matter anymore. It matters. Martinez heard the intensity in his own voice, pulled it back. Those 12 men you saved, their families, the soldiers who learned about you in training. It matters. Harrison pushed off the wall, turned toward the fence line, hands in his pockets. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. "You know what I remember most about that day? Not the firefight. Not the wound. That's not—" "I got the Medal of Honor for the worst day of my life," Harrison said, voice hard now. "They put a ribbon around my neck and told me I was a hero. Gave me a pension, told me I'd never have to pay for a drink in uniform again. And you know what? All I wanted was to forget, to find something simple, something that didn't require being brave or making life or death decisions or watching kids die in my arms." He pulled his hands from the fence, crossed his arms again, back to contained, back to protected. "So I came here, got a job, showed up every day, and nobody knew and nobody cared, and that was exactly what I needed. Peace and quiet and obscurity." Martinez understood then. Harrison wasn't hiding from glory. He was hiding from memory. The kitchen was a refuge, not a prison. "Jensen doesn't know," Martinez said quietly. "The kid making fun of you. None of them know." "Good. They should know." Harrison's voice was firm, final. "They shouldn't. I don't want their respect because of something I did 55 years ago. If they can't respect an old man doing his job, that's on them, not me. With all due respect, don't, please." Harrison's voice softened. "I know what you're thinking, Sergeant. You're thinking those kids need to learn a lesson. You're thinking I deserve recognition. Maybe you're right. But I'm asking, leave it alone." They stood there in the heat, two soldiers separated by decades and experience, connected by something neither of them had words for. Finally, Martinez nodded. "All right, I won't say anything." Relief washed over Harrison's face. "Thank you. But if someone else finds out—" "They won't. Nobody looks at the old guy in the kitchen. I'm furniture. That's how I like it." Harrison checked his watch, ancient Timex with a cracked face. "I need to get back. Lunch prep." He walked toward the door, then paused, looked back. Martinez. First name. Raphael. Raphael. Harrison nodded like he was filing it away. "You're a good NCO. I can tell. You care about your soldiers. That matters more than you know." Then he was gone, back into the fluorescent-lit kitchen, back to the industrial sinks and the smell of institutional food, back to the peace and quiet and obscurity he'd built for himself over 51 years. Martinez stood alone on the loading dock, sweating in the sun, feeling like he'd just had a conversation that changed everything and nothing. The crack. Private Jensen made his second mistake 4 days later. The platoon was doing maintenance in the motor pool, hands deep in grease and frustration, when the conversation turned to the usual complaints about base life. Food, training schedules, the air conditioning in the barracks. "At least the chow's been better lately," someone said. "Bullshit," Jensen replied, wiping his hands on a rag. "Same garbage, different day. That old cook couldn't season food if his life depended on it." Martinez looked up from the Humvee engine he was working on. "Which cook?" "You know, Gramps. The old dude who shuffles around looking lost." Harrison. "Whatever, dude's ancient. Probably shouldn't even be working. I heard he's like 80 years old." He's 76, Martinez said, voice level. Jensen laughed. Even worse. My grandpa retired at 65. This guy's still flipping eggs at 76. That's just sad. Something inside Martinez snapped. The promise he'd made to Harrison suddenly felt less important than the lesson Jensen needed to learn. You ever wonder why he's still working? Martinez asked quietly. 'Cause he's broke? 'Cause Social Security doesn't pay enough? Jensen shrugged. I don't know, man. Not my problem. Maybe you should ask him about November 12th, 1968. The casual conversation around them faltered. Stopped. Other soldiers looked up, sensing a shift in tone. Jensen frowned. What happened November 12th, 1968? That's when Sergeant William T. Harrison saved 12 lives under machine gun fire, while wounded, in Vietnam. The motor pool went completely silent. Even the metallic clinking of tools stopped. What are you talking about? Jensen's voice had lost its cocky edge. Martinez straightened up, wiped his hands. He'd broken his promise, he realized, but some lessons were too important to let slide. The man you've been making fun of, the one you call Gramps, he has a Medal of Honor, Jensen. The Medal of Honor. He's one of 63 living recipients in the entire country. And you've been mocking the way he walks. Jensen's face went pale. That can't be true. It's true. I've seen the citation. I've read the newspaper articles. I've talked to him. Martinez's voice was harder now. The reason he walks slow is because he took multiple gunshots to the leg while carrying wounded soldiers across 200 yards of open ground. The reason he keeps to himself is because watching kids die will do that to you. Private Chen, working on the next vehicle over, had his phone out. Typing, his eyes went wide. Holy shit, Sergeant Martinez is right. It's here. Congressional Medal of Honor recipients. Harrison, William T. There's a whole citation. Soldiers gathered around Chen's phone. Martinez watched their faces change as they read. Disbelief giving way to shock, giving way to something like shame. Jensen looked sick. How were we supposed to know? You weren't. Martinez's voice softened slightly. He doesn't want people to know. He just wants to do his job and be left alone. But that doesn't give you permission to mock him. Ever. You understand me? Yes, Sergeant. All of you understand me? A chorus of, yes, Sergeant, echoed across the motor pool. Martinez looked at his platoon. Young faces, barely out of their teens, thinking they knew how the world worked. They were good kids, mostly. They just needed to learn that respect wasn't something you gave only when you knew someone's credentials. Tomorrow morning, you will all eat breakfast in the mess hall. You will go through Harrison's line, and you will treat him the same way you'd treat a living Medal of Honor recipient. Not because he wants you to, but because it's the right thing to do. Clear? Clear, Sergeant. But as Martinez returned to his work, hands trembling slightly with adrenaline, he knew he'd just changed something fundamental. The silence Harrison had built so carefully was cracking, and Martinez wasn't sure if he'd done the right thing or committed an unforgivable betrayal. Word spread like wildfire. By that evening, half the base knew. By the next morning, everyone knew. The story gained details with each retelling, some true, some exaggerated, all of them painting William T. Harrison as something larger than life. Martinez arrived at the mess hall at 06:15, earlier than usual. The line was already forming, but something was different. The usual chaos, soldiers joking, shoving, complaining, was muted, subdued. Harrison was at his station, same as always. If he knew about yesterday's motor pool conversation, his face didn't show it. Jensen was first in line. Martinez watched from a distance as the young private approached. Trey held almost at attention. Jensen said something. Martinez couldn't hear what. Harrison responded, ladled eggs, moved on to the next soldier. The line moved slower than usual. Each soldier paused a fraction longer at Harrison's station. Some nodded respectfully. One older staff sergeant actually saluted. Informal, quick, but unmistakable. Harrison's expression never changed. He just kept working. Scoop, pour, move. the same rhythm he'd maintained for 51 years. But Martinez saw it. The tension in his shoulders, the way his hands moved slightly faster, trying to rush through the service, the way he avoided eye contact, even more than usual. This was what Harrison had feared, what he'd asked Martinez to prevent, and Martinez had failed him. At 06:45, Captain Morrison entered the mess hall. He walked directly to Martinez's table, sat down without asking. "Sergeant Martinez," a word. "Sir, did you tell your platoon about Harrison?" "Yes, sir." Morrison was quiet for a moment, studying Martinez with an expression somewhere between irritation and curiosity. Why? Private Jensen was being disrespectful. He needed to understand who he was talking about. And you thought telling him Harrison won the Medal of Honor was the appropriate response. Martinez met his captain's eyes. "I thought it was the truthful response, sir." Morrison sighed, rubbed his face. He looked tired. "I got 3 calls this morning. One from the base commander's office, asking if we have a Medal of Honor recipient working in our mess hall and why nobody told him. One from public affairs, wanting to do a story. And one from Harrison's supervisor saying the old man looked like he was ready to quit." Martinez's stomach dropped. "He's quitting?" "He hasn't yet, but apparently he came in this morning, saw the way people were looking at him, and told his supervisor he was thinking about it." Morrison leaned forward. "You need to understand something, Sergeant. That man has been here longer than most of our soldiers have been alive. He doesn't want attention. He doesn't want recognition. And you just turned him into a spectacle." "Sir, I'm not done." Morrison's voice wasn't angry, just firm. "I understand what you were trying to do, and maybe Jensen needed that lesson, but you made a decision that wasn't yours to make. You exposed something Harrison spent 5 decades trying to keep private." Martinez had no defense. Morrison was right. "What do I do, sir?" "You fix it." Morrison stood. "Figure out how to give that man back his peace and quiet. Because if he walks off this base, it's on you." The captain left. Martinez sat alone at his table, staring at his untouched breakfast, watching Harrison serve the never-ending line of soldiers who now all knew exactly who he was. And for the first time in his career, Sergeant First Class Rafael Martinez had no idea what the right answer was. Martinez found Harrison in the storage room at 11:30. The old man was alone, sitting on a stack of 50-pound flour bags, holding a paper cup of coffee that had long gone cold. He wasn't drinking it, just holding it, staring at the concrete wall like it held answers. "Mind if I sit?" Martinez asked from the doorway. Harrison didn't look up. "Free country." Martinez grabbed a folding chair, set it down a respectful distance away. The storage room smelled like onions and cardboard and the faint mildew that came from insufficient ventilation. A single bulb cast harsh shadows. They sat in silence for a full minute. Outside, the lunch rush was starting. The familiar sounds of trays clattering, voices rising, life continuing as it always did. Finally, Martinez spoke. "I'm sorry." "For what?" "For breaking my promise, for telling them." Harrison took a breath, let it out slowly. "You were trying to teach a kid a lesson. I understand that. It wasn't my lesson to teach, not that way." "No, it wasn't." Harrison set down the coffee cup, finally looked at Martinez. His eyes weren't angry, just tired. "You know what the worst part is? I knew this would happen someday. 51 years, I figured I was safe, that the records were buried deep enough that nobody would look. But the internet," he shook his head. "Everything's out there now, forever. You can't disappear anymore. You could have told people you're not that Harrison, that it's a different person." "Could have thought about it." Harrison rubbed his face. "But I never learned to lie well. The Army teaches you a lot of things. Lying wasn't one of them." Martinez leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "What do you want me to do? I'll do whatever you need. If you want me to tell everyone it was a mistake, that I got the wrong person." "Won't work. They've seen the photos now. The dates match up. They know." Harrison stood slowly, his movements careful, those old injuries making themselves known. What I want is for things to go back to the way they were. But that's not possible anymore, is it? No, I don't think it is. Then I guess I'll be leaving. Harrison said it matter-of-factly like he was reading a menu. Tell my supervisor I'm done. Find someplace quieter, maybe a civilian job off base. Please don't. The words came out more urgent than Martinez intended. Don't leave because of this, because of me. I'm not leaving because of you, Sergeant. I'm leaving because I'm tired. Harrison walked to the door, paused with his hand on the frame. I came here in 1972 because I needed a place to be invisible, and it worked for a long time. But I'm 76 years old. Maybe it's time to stop running. You're not running. You're surviving. Harrison smiled, but there was no humor in it. Sometimes they're the same thing. He walked out, left Martinez sitting in the storage room, surrounded by industrial supplies and the weight of his own mistake. Martinez didn't see Harrison for the rest of that day, or the next morning. The breakfast line was staffed by a substitute, younger guy, efficient but impersonal, who didn't know the regulars or their preferences. Where's Harrison? Jensen asked quietly when he reached Martinez's table. The private looked genuinely worried, which was something. Don't know. Is he coming back? I don't know. Jensen sat down, pushed his food around his tray without eating. I feel like shit, Sergeant. Good, you should. I want to apologize. To him, directly. Jensen looked up, and Martinez saw something different in the young soldier's face. Maturity, maybe, or just the beginning of it. Would that be okay? Or would it make things worse? Martinez thought about it. I honestly don't know, Private, but if you get the chance and he's willing to listen, then yes, you should apologize. The day crawled by. Martinez went through his duties mechanically. Training sessions, equipment checks, paperwork. His mind was elsewhere, replaying the conversation in the storage room, trying to figure out what he should have done differently. At 1700, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. Sergeant Martinez. Raphael, it's William Harrison. Martinez sat up straight. Mr. Harrison, how are you? I'm at home. Called in sick today. First time in 11 years. Harrison's voice sounded different on the phone, older somehow. I've been thinking about what you said, about not running. Yes, sir. Stop calling me sir. Hard habit to break. A pause. Then, can you come by my place tonight, around 1900? There's something I want to show you. Of course, I have your address from... Martinez stopped himself. From the personnel file, I know. Harrison almost laughed. 1900, apartment 2B. I'll leave the door unlocked. The line went dead. The apartment complex looked worse in person than it had from Martinez's car. Peeling paint, cracked asphalt, the kind of place where people lived because they couldn't afford anywhere better, or because they'd stopped caring about their surroundings. Apartment 2B was on the ground floor, curtains drawn, a single light visible through the fabric. Martinez knocked anyway, despite Harrison saying he'd leave it unlocked. It's open. The apartment was smaller than Martinez expected. One room visible from the entrance. Combination living room and kitchen, separated by a breakfast bar. Everything was military neat. No clutter. No decorations except for a single calendar on the wall, marked with careful X's through each completed day. Harrison sat at a small dining table, 2 chairs, a cardboard box between them. Close the door. Sit down. Martinez did both. Up close, Harrison looked older than he had even 2 days ago. Like whatever was holding him together had loosened slightly. I haven't opened this box in 23 years, Harrison said, hands resting on the cardboard lid. Last time was when my wife died. I was looking for her insurance papers and found this instead. Almost threw it away then, but I couldn't. What's in it? My life. The part I tried to forget. Harrison opened the box. Inside were papers, yellowed with age, photographs, a folded flag, and at the bottom, wrapped in tissue paper, a blue ribbon with white stars. The Medal of Honor. Martinez had never seen one in person. It was smaller than he'd imagined, but somehow heavier. The ribbon was faded, the medal tarnished. But there was no mistaking what it was. "They gave this to me on March 1st, 1969, Harrison said quietly. "Ceremony at the White House, President Johnson. My parents were there. My little sister. She was so proud she cried through the whole thing." He picked up the medal, let it rest in his palm. "I wore it once, just that day. Then I put it in a box and tried to forget it existed." "Why?" Harrison set the medal down, carefully, like it might break. "Because every time I looked at it, all I saw were the faces of the men who died. Coleman, Hendricks, Rodriguez, Brewer, all 12 of them. They gave me a medal for being alive when they weren't. How do you live with that?" Martinez had no answer. Harrison pulled out photographs, black and white, edges crumbling. "This was my squad, taken in '67, before everything went to hell." He pointed to faces, one by one. "Miller, Johnson, that's Rodriguez. Different Martinez, the one I told you about. This was Hendricks, our CO. And this..." He tapped a young face, serious eyes, wearing a helmet too big for his head. "That's me, 20 years old. Thought I knew everything." The young Harrison in the photo looked nothing like the old man across the table. Same bones, maybe, but everything else was different. That kid still had hope in his eyes. "What happened to them?" Martinez asked quietly. "Miller made it home, moved to Oregon, became a carpenter. We exchanged Christmas cards for a while, then lost touch. Johnson died in '72, different operation. Rodriguez..." Harrison's voice caught. "Rodriguez took his own life in '74, 2 years after coming home. He had nightmares. PTSD, they call it now. Back then, we just called it being broken." He put the photos down, pulled out newspaper clippings. The headlines Martinez had already seen online, but faded now, fragile. "Local hero returns, Medal of Honor for Kentucky soldier." "They made me do interviews," Harrison said. "Parades, speaking engagements. Everyone wanted to hear the story, how brave I was, how heroic. And I stood there and told them what they wanted to hear because that's what you do. But inside, I was dying. Because brave men don't feel like I felt. Heroes don't wake up screaming. And every time someone thanked me for my service, all I could think was, I'm a fraud." "You're not..." "Let me finish." Harrison's voice was gentle but firm. "I know what you're going to say, that I'm not a fraud, that I earned the medal, that what I did was real. And intellectually, I understand that. But understanding something and feeling it are different things." He pulled out one more photograph. This one was in color, more recent. A woman with gray hair and kind eyes standing next to a younger Harrison in front of a small house. "My wife, Sarah, met her in 1973. She was a nurse at the VA hospital in Louisville. I was there for the usual reasons. She knew about the medal, didn't care. She saw me, not the ribbon. We got married in '74, moved here in '75 when I got the job at Fort Campbell." Harrison touched the photo like he could reach through time. "She died in 2000, cancer. And suddenly I was alone again, doing the same job, going through the same motions. But without her, it all felt pointless." "Why didn't you retire?" "Because then what would I do? Sit in this apartment and wait to die? At least at the base, I'm useful. I feed soldiers. It's simple work, but it matters. You can't fight on an empty stomach." He almost smiled. "Sarah used to say I was still serving, just in a different way. I think she was trying to make me feel better about being a cook. But maybe she was right." Martinez looked at the contents of the box, a life reduced to paper and memory. "Why are you showing me this?" Harrison closed the box, folded his hands on top. "Because you asked, because you cared enough to look, because maybe..." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Because maybe it's time to stop hiding. Not because I want recognition, but because these kids, your soldiers, they need to understand something." "What's that?" that heroes are just people. Regular people who were in a bad situation and did what needed doing. Nothing more, nothing less. Harrison stood slowly, walked to the window, pulled back the curtain to look at the parking lot. They think the Medal of Honor makes you special. It doesn't. It just means you survived something terrible and someone noticed. Martinez joined him at the window. Outside, the evening traffic hummed on the main road. Ordinary life, continuing regardless. "What do you want to do?" Martinez asked. Harrison was quiet for a long time. Then, "I want to go back to work. I want to finish what I started 51 years ago, but I need your help. Anything. Those kids who know now, Jensen and the others, they're going to treat me differently, like I'm fragile, or special, or some kind of legend." Harrison turned to face Martinez. "I need you to tell them to stop. Tell them I'm just the cook. Tell them the only thing I want is for them to say please and thank you and not waste food. Can you do that?" "Yes, I can do that. One more thing." Harrison walked back to the box, pulled out the Medal of Honor, held it in the light. "There's going to be pressure. From the base commander, from public affairs, from people who think I should be at ceremonies and giving speeches. I need you to run interference. Tell them I'm not interested, that I just want to do my job in peace. I will, I promise." Harrison wrapped the medal back in tissue paper, placed it in the box, closed the lid. "Good. Then I'll see you at breakfast service tomorrow, 500 sharp." Martinez nodded, started toward the door, then stopped. "Mr. Harrison? William?" "Yeah?" "For what it's worth, I think Sarah was right. You never stopped serving. You just found a different way." Harrison's eyes glistened, but he didn't cry. Men like him had learned a long time ago how to hold things in. "Get out of here, Sergeant, before I get all sentimental." Martinez left, drove back to base with the windows down, letting the warm Kentucky night wash over him. And for the first time since the motor pool conversation, he felt like maybe, just maybe, things were going to be okay. Harrison returned to work the next morning. Martinez was there, along with his entire platoon, waiting in line before the official breakfast service started. Jensen stepped forward first. "Mr. Harrison, I don't." Harrison's voice was kind but firm. "Whatever you're about to say, I don't need to hear it. You were an ignorant kid who made a mistake. Now you know better. That's enough. But I wanted to apologize. Apology accepted. Now get in line properly. You're making me run behind schedule." The tension broke. A few soldiers laughed nervously. The line formed up, and breakfast service proceeded exactly as it had every other day. But something was different. Not in Harrison. He was the same as always. But in the soldiers. They didn't salute or make a fuss. They just treated him with basic human respect. Please and thank you. No mockery. No jokes about his age or his pace. Just respect. Martinez watched from his usual table. Captain Morrison appeared beside him, coffee cup in hand. "Heard you went to see him last night." "Yes, sir." "And?" "He wants to be left alone. Just wants to do his job." Morrison nodded slowly. "Base commander's office called again this morning. They want to do a formal recognition ceremony. Invite the press. Make it a whole thing. Harrison won't agree to it. I told them that. They said they'd reach out to him directly." Martinez felt a surge of protectiveness. "Sir, with respect, that man has earned the right to be left alone. He doesn't want recognition. He wants peace and quiet." "I agree with you, Sergeant." "Which is why I told the base commander the same thing." Morrison took a sip of coffee. "Sometimes the best way to honor someone is to respect their wishes, even if it's not what we think they deserve." Over the next week, things gradually returned to normal, or close to normal. The knowledge of who Harrison was never quite faded, but it became accepted background information rather than breaking news. Soldiers still came through his line, still got their eggs and hash browns. But now they looked him in the eye when they said thank you. And Harrison, for his part, seemed more relaxed, less guarded. Martinez kept his promise. When public affairs called, he deflected. When younger soldiers asked for stories, he told them Harrison didn't give interviews. When the base commander's office persisted about a ceremony, Martinez and Morrison formed a protective wall. Harrison just kept showing up. 0445 every morning. Out the door at 1400 every afternoon. The same routine he'd maintained for 51 years. But there were small changes. Sometimes during his lunch break, younger soldiers would sit near him. Not at his table, he still ate alone, but close enough that their presence formed a kind of protective circle. They didn't bother him, just sat there, ate their meals, let him know in their silent way that they understood. Jensen became one of the regulars. Martinez watched the private grow up a little bit more each day. Less cocky, more thoughtful. He'd started researching Vietnam, reading books about the war, trying to understand what Harrison's generation had gone through. One morning, 3 weeks after the revelation, Jensen brought something to breakfast. A book, thick paperback, worn cover. He approached Harrison Station, waited until the morning rush ended. "Mr. Harrison, could I ask you a favor?" Harrison looked up, wary. "Depends on the favor." Jensen held out the book. "We Were Soldiers Once," and Young by Hal Moore. "Would you sign this?" "Not because of the medal, just because I'm trying to learn, and I'd like to remember where the lesson started." Harrison stared at the book for a long moment. Then, slowly, he took it. "You got a pen?" Jensen handed one over. Harrison opened to the title page, wrote something, handed it back. Jensen looked down, read what Harrison had written. "To Private Jensen. The bravest thing you can do is admit when you're wrong. You did that. Keep learning. Keep growing. William Harrison." No mention of rank, no mention of medals, just his name. Jensen's eyes went red, but he held it together. "Thank you, sir." "You're welcome. Now move along. You're holding up the line." But Martinez saw Harrison smile as Jensen walked away. Just a small one, there and gone in a second. But real. 6 months later, Martinez got promoted to Sergeant First Class and reassigned to a training unit at Fort Benning. His last day at Fort Campbell, he went to the mess hall at 13:30 after the lunch rush had cleared. Harrison was wiping down his station, getting ready to leave for the day. "Come to say goodbye?" Harrison asked without looking up. "Yes, wanted to thank you." "For what?" "For the lesson. For teaching me that heroism isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just showing up every day and doing your job." Harrison stopped wiping, turned around. "That's what I was trying to tell you from the beginning." "I know. I'm a slow learner." They shook hands. Harrison's grip was still strong, calloused from decades of work. "You take care of those soldiers at Benning," Harrison said. "Make sure they understand that the uniform doesn't make you special. The work does." "I will." Martinez walked toward the exit, then paused. "One more question. If you could go back to November 12th, 1968, knowing everything that happened after, the medal, the attention, the decades of hiding, would you do it differently?" Harrison thought about it. Really thought about it. "No," he said finally. "Because 12 families got to keep their sons a little longer. Even if it was just minutes. Even if they died anyway. They got those extra minutes because I ran across that field, and that has to be worth something, even if it broke me." Martinez nodded. There was nothing more to say. He left Fort Campbell the next morning. In his rearview mirror, he watched the base disappear, along with the mess hall where William T. Harrison would be starting another breakfast service in a few hours, like he had every day for 51 years. 3 years later, Martinez was at Fort Benning when he got the call. Unknown Kentucky number. Sergeant First Class Martinez. "Sergeant Martinez? This is Captain Morrison. I don't know if you remember me." "Of course, sir. How are you?" "I'm well. I'm calling about William Harrison." Martinez's heart sank. "Is he He passed away last night, heart attack. Went peacefully in his sleep. He was 79. The world seemed to stop for a moment. Martinez sat down heavily in his desk chair. I'm so sorry, sir. I thought you'd want to know. The funeral is Saturday. Small service. Harrison's nephew is handling arrangements. Morrison paused. He left something for you. Asked that it be delivered if anything happened to him. What is it? A box. I haven't opened it, but there's a note on top with your name. The box arrived 3 days later, shipped overnight. Inside was the cardboard box from Harrison's apartment, the one with the photographs and newspaper clippings and Medal of Honor. The note was written in Harrison's careful handwriting. Raphael, if you're reading this, then I finally got to rest. I don't believe in much, but I like to think I'm with Sarah now, and Hendricks and all the others. If that's true, then things are good. I want you to have this, not because I think you need a medal, though you should have one, you're a fine NCO, but because I want you to remember what we talked about. Heroes are just people. The medal doesn't make you special, the work does. Use these things to teach. Show young soldiers that bravery isn't always loud, that sometimes the hardest thing to do is keep living when part of you died a long time ago. That's showing up every day, doing your job, treating people with respect. That's heroism too. And tell them about the silence, about that moment when the shooting stops and you realize you're still alive and you don't know if that's a blessing or a curse. Tell them that feeling never fully goes away, but you learn to live with it. You find your peace in simple things, in routine, in service. Thank you for seeing me, not the medal. Me, William. Martinez sat in his quarters for a long time, holding the note, looking at the Medal of Honor resting on tissue paper. The next day, he went to his company commander and requested permission to create a display in the training building. Not a shrine, just a small case with the medal, some photographs, and Harrison's story told simply and honestly. At the bottom of the display, he added a quote, not from a president or a general, but from William Harrison himself, transcribed from their conversation in that small apartment. Heroes are just people. Regular people who were in a bad situation and did what needed doing. Nothing more, nothing less. The funeral was on Saturday, like Morrison said. Small service at a Methodist church in Clarksville. Maybe 30 people. Harrison's nephew, a few old veterans who'd known him, some kitchen staff from the base, Captain Morrison, and every soldier from Martinez's old platoon who could make the journey. Jensen was there, in dress uniform. He'd made specialist now. Was talking about trying for NCO training. The service was simple. A chaplain who'd never met Harrison read from prepared notes. Talked about duty and sacrifice and service. It was fine, generic. The kind of eulogy that could apply to anyone. Afterward, at the reception, Martinez stood with the other soldiers. They were quiet, respectful, drinking coffee and eating sandwiches and sharing stories in low voices. An older man approached, 70s maybe, weathered face, eyes that had seen too much. You, Sergeant Martinez? Yes, sir. William mentioned you, said you were good people. The man held out his hand. Jack Coleman. Jimmy was my little brother. Martinez froze. Jimmy? Coleman? Yep. The one William carried. The one who didn't make it. Coleman smiled sadly. William came to see my mom in 1969, told her what happened, said Jimmy was brave, said he kept apologizing for being heavy, made my mom laugh through her tears. I'm so sorry for your loss. It was 54 years ago. I've made my peace. Coleman looked toward Harrison's closed casket. William visited my mom every year until she died in '94. Just came by, sat with her, told her stories about Jimmy, never made a big deal out of it, just did it because he thought it was right. Martinez felt something twist in his chest. All those years, Harrison had been carrying more than his own memories. He'd been carrying the family's too. "Did he ever talk about the medal?" Martinez asked. "Once. I asked him about it. He said, 'I'd trade it in a heartbeat to have brought Jimmy home alive.' That was William. Never could see himself as a hero. Always saw himself as a man who failed to save enough people." Coleman put a hand on Martinez's shoulder. "He was wrong, though. He saved plenty, not just that day in Vietnam, but every day after, just by being who he was, by showing up, by remembering." They stood together in silence, two men connected by a third who'd spent his life trying to disappear. 10 years later, Martinez retired from the Army as a master sergeant. 28 years of service. He'd earned his own decorations: Bronze Star, Purple Heart from a deployment to Afghanistan, half a dozen others. Nothing as prestigious as the Medal of Honor, but respectable. He moved back to Kentucky, bought a small house outside Louisville, got a job at a high school, teaching JROTC to kids who thought they knew what military service meant. Every semester, on the first day of class, he brought in a box. He'd tell them about William T. Harrison, not the heroic parts, or not just those. He'd tell them about the man who worked in a kitchen for 51 years, who showed up early and left late, who treated every soldier with respect, who carried silence like other men carried rifles. He'd show them the Medal of Honor, let them hold it if they wanted to, let them feel the weight of it. Then he'd tell them the truth. The medal was the lightest thing Harrison ever carried. Some students understood, most didn't, but a few, there were always a few, looked at the medal and saw past the medal and ribbon, saw the cost, saw what it meant to be truly brave. Those were the ones Martinez knew would be okay. Late at night, sometimes, Martinez thought about that day in the motor pool, the decision that changed everything, the promise he broke. He'd second-guessed it 1,000 times, wondered if he'd done the right thing, if Harrison had died resenting him for exposing his secret. But then he'd remember Coleman, and the other families Harrison had visited over the years, and the young soldiers who'd learned to see beyond rank and medals to the person underneath. And he'd remember what Harrison said in his apartment that night: "Maybe it's time to stop running." Harrison had gotten 3 more years, 3 years of being seen, not as a legend or a hero, but as a man who'd done something extraordinary and then spent his life trying to be ordinary. 3 years of respect earned not for what he'd done in 1968, but for who he was every day after. Maybe that was worth it. Maybe that was the point. Martinez kept the box in his office at the high school. Next to it, a photograph he'd found in Harrison's apartment after the funeral. The old man at his station, ladle in hand, caught mid-motion by someone's camera phone. He wasn't looking at the camera, just doing his job, living his life, finding peace in routine. On the frame, Martinez had engraved a quote, not from Harrison this time, but about him. "The bravest thing you can do is keep living when part of you died a long time ago." That's heroism too. Every morning, Martinez looked at that photo before starting his day, remembered the lesson, remembered the man, and every morning he said the same thing, quiet as a prayer: "Thank you for your service, William." All of it, every single day. The silence that followed was its own kind of answer. The kind of silence that speaks louder than words. The kind of silence that honors the fallen and the living alike. The kind of silence that William T. Harrison had earned, carried, and finally, after 51 years, found peace within. Author's note: this story honors every veteran who came home and found their peace not in recognition, but in routine, who carried their silence with dignity, who showed up every day and did the work that needed doing, without asking for applause. To those who serve in ways we never see, thank you. Your silence speaks volumes.